couple days ago, I was out playing disc golf when I noticed a whole bunch of these little dog violets. I thought they might do well in a terrarium, so I took some home, and we're going to try that today. The container we're going to be using today is this bowl. It measures 4 inches high by 5 inches across. Our first step is making the drainage layer. This is especially important in this terrarium, because from what I can tell online, these violets like well-drained soil. I want to be able to remove the water from the bottom of this terrarium manually, so it doesn't build up over time and stagnate. To do this, I'm going to take a piece of vinyl tubing, cut some holes in the end, and let it go all the way through the drainage layer and the substrate, so that I can stick a siphon in it at the top. All I'm doing here is cutting it to the approximate height, and then cutting some notches in the end so that water can get in but gravel can't. We can go ahead and place it in the terrarium, and then add our gravel. I'm going to try to make this drainage layer a little bit extra tall, so that way we have more drainage than usual. After pouring in our gravel, we can go ahead and approximately level off the surface. This lessens the risk of any of the soil being able to sit in any water that pools in the bottom. For the substrate, I'm starting with the base of this orchid potting soil, and I'm going to later mix in some orchid bark to increase aeration. After adding in the soil, we can go ahead and dump in all of our bark. There's even a few little bits of sphagnum moss that snuck in there. Now we just mix it up really well. We're skipping the substrate barrier on this one because I don't have any more window screen right now. Now we're just going to dump it directly on top of our gravel. I think the gravel's probably fine enough, and the soil probably has enough structural integrity that it should be fine, and we shouldn't get a whole lot of dirt falling into the drainage layer. The hardscape for this one is pretty simple, with a couple of little rocks and pieces of gravel. I'm not trying to do anything super fancy here in case this entire experiment is a flop and I just have to tear the terrarium down a week from now. I decided it looked a little too symmetrical, so I scooted the pile of rocks on the left backward a little bit, and then I was happy. I'm going to go ahead and clear away some of the dirt from the front here, because I want to make a little path with sand later on. Just go ahead and plop the dirt in the back. It creates a better sense of depth anyway. Time to make a cap for our siphon tube, so that substrate and stuff stops falling in there. This is just regular modeling clay, albeit a darker color, but it's not advertised as plant or animal safe or anything like that. I figure it's probably okay, because it's not really going to be exposed to any water, and this is just a terrarium without any animals in it. After using the offcut of our tube to get the perfect diameter plug, we can go ahead and slide that onto our drainage tube, and we're set. First up for planting is obviously the violets. These guys are probably the tallest plants we're putting in this terrarium, so we're going to plant them near the back, trying to cluster them around the tube to hide it. Next up is the moss. This is broom fork moss, a type of moss which is native to where I live. I'm just taking a couple clumps of moss at a time and pressing them down onto the substrate in the areas where I want them. The end result should be a nice dense green carpet of moss. After placing some more moss in the foreground, we can go ahead and add the sand path that I mentioned earlier. I'm using a fairly light color of sand to contrast with the dark green of the plants behind it and the rocks that we're going to form a border for the path later on. I'm tilting the whole thing forward so that way I can get the sand underneath the small opening and into the foreground. Once all the sand is roughly poured, we can go ahead and use our fingers to smooth it out. Now to add our accent rocks around the edge of the path. This stuff is basically just driveway gravel, albeit smaller pieces. Notice how the flaring of the path in the foreground and the rapid size decrease the further back you go creates a greater sense of depth. Our next plant is oak leaf creeping fig, or Ficus pumila quercifolia. It's a tiny little ficus species that looks almost like miniature ivy. Next plant is Selaginella erythropus, I think, ruby red. This is a kind of plant called a spike moss. It grows pretty much like a miniature fern. In retrospect, I'm not too sure about how well the color goes with the overall theme of this build, so I might end up omitting it in future similar projects. Finally, we can go ahead and give it a misting of water.